We bring you this talk today as part of our Alan S. Brown Scholar Series. Alan S. Brown proudly served his country for 23 years as a U.S. naval officer and was a decorated veteran of the Vietnam War. In memory of his dedication to community and education, we present talks from renowned scholars and authors. I don't think I introduced myself. I'm Mike Rugel from the National Museum of American Jewish Military History. Pleased to be joined today by Dr. Bryan Mark Rigg to discuss his new book, Flamethrower, Iwo Jima Medal of Honor recipient and U.S. Marine Woody Williams and his controversial award, Japan's Holocaust and the Pacific War. Bryan Mark Rigg is the author of Hitler's Jewish Soldiers, which won the William E. Colby Award for Military History, was featured on NBC-TV's Dateline, and has been translated into 11 languages. He's also the author of Rescue from the Reich, Lives of Hitler's Jewish Soldiers, and The Rabbi Saved by Hitler's Jewish Soldiers. He currently runs his own financial advisory firm, Rigg Wealth Management, and he is a member of Jewish War Veterans Post 256 in Dallas. I was pleased to receive a copy of Flamethrower a few months ago. I was familiar with Dr. Rigg from Hitler's Jewish Soldiers, which tells the story of the really amazing number of soldiers with some type of Jewish ancestry who served in the German military in World War II. The new book, Flamethrower, tells the story of Woody Williams and his experiences in combat on Iwo Jima and the controversial path to receiving the Medal of Honor. And Woody Williams is outside of our usual subject matter covering Jews in the American military, but the book is about more than Woody Williams. There's vivid depictions of combat on Iwo Jima, and it also addresses a lot of really important big picture ideas. How does combat, as brutal as what they saw on Iwo, affect different individuals in different ways? There's a lot in the book on the process of awarding the Medal of Honor, how it's not always a straightforward or necessarily a fair process. The book also gets at some of the classic issues that historians deal with, like the problem of memory. How do we deal with conflicting accounts of the same incidences? What sources can we trust, and what do we have to verify, and how do we verify those things? And significantly for us, the book, beyond just Woody Williams, does have a lot of some significant, important Jewish figures, including Rabbi Roland Gittelsohn, whose words in a sermon at the 5th Marine Division Cemetery dedication continue to be repeated and heard and are as poignant as ever. Before I hand it over to Bryan, I'll ask people to submit questions using the Q&A function. The Q&A button's on the bottom of your screen. You can type your questions in there, and we will get to them at the end. So thank you for being here. And Bryan, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming this afternoon to listen to this presentation. I'll give you a little background on my person. I grew up in Texas, went off to Yale University for my undergraduate studies, studied under Paula Hyman, head of Jewish studies there at Yale, and also Henry Turner, a German historian, as well as Jeffrey Salmons, German studies expert. From there, I went on to Cambridge University on basically like the Rhodes Scholarship for Harvard and Yale. It's called the Henry Fellowship. And I studied under Jonathan Steinberg at Cambridge University, where I got my master's and PhD. Many of you will know his famous rabbi father, Milton Steinberg, who wrote As a Driven Leaf. And Steinberg was a wonderful mentor, just passed away from Alzheimer's, which I'm very sad to report. He was at the end of his career. He's at University of Pennsylvania. Many of you will be interested to know that until I was 21, I didn't know about my Jewish background. And when I went over to Germany to do research on my family and learn the language of my ancestors, I found that I had all these Jews in the family branches. And it really awakened an exploration for identity for me. And for the next couple of years, I explored that. I studied in a yeshiva in Jerusalem, or Sameach, from 1993 to 1994. I later served in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, as an Army grunt in 1998. And then I was working on my book, Hitler's Jewish Soldiers, at that time, studying about Jews and men of Jewish descent who served in the Nazi military. And, then I wanted to serve my own country. And so after that experience, I joined the Marine Corps. My dad was a Navy navigator on Neptunes during the Korean War, anti-submarine warfare. My brother was a Harrier pilot in the Marine Corps. And I wanted to be a pilot as well. My first two choices were going to be the F-18 and the Cobra attack helicopter. I was really influenced from what I saw what the Israeli military did with those. But I got injured, and since I was like supposedly the 12th Marine Corps officer on active duty to have a PhD, they stuck me in a think tank for a couple of years while I tried to get healed up to get back to active duty. Running basically the warfighting lab at the basic school in Quantico, Virginia, and was lucky to be under then Colonel John Allen, later General John Allen, who took over for Petraeus, and he took very good care of me. I eventually had to get medically retired and went into academia for many years, and then I decided to do a shift and joined Wall Street. Now I have my own financial wealth management firm. Now getting to the subject matter that we're discussing today, my book, Flamethrower. In 2015, I had the opportunity to attend the 70th reunion of the Battle of Iwo Jima. So as a good Marine Corps officer, I thought it would be very good to go there, touch Mecca, be with veterans, and learn more about that battle. I've gone to tons of battlefields throughout my life, and you know, and I, since I'm a Holocaust historian, I've gone to several concentration camps. I do believe that, you know, since I write about World War II and the Holocaust, going to these places is very important. In addition to reading the books about these events, as well as going to the archives that have the documentation about these events. So I wanted to go to Iwo Jima, just, you know, as more a Marine, and also take my then 12-year-old son to just have a good father-son bonding experience. Well, on this trip, I met Medal of Honor recipient Woody Williams. He is now the last living World War II Medal of Honor recipient, alive. And when I met him in 2015 with a host of other veterans, there was about 30 veterans all told, with about 400 family members that we were with. And as I got to know him and found that nobody had written up his story and that he hadn't written up his story, I basically said, hey, you know, Woody, what you've told me so far about your life, it's very interesting. It's worthy of some documentation and study. And I'm a Marine, you're a Marine, I'm a trained historian. We should try to, you know, use your life to tell this story again, to honor what our men and women did during World War II, and especially what the Marines and sailors did at, and also Army grunts. A lot of people don't realize a regiment came in at the very end and did a lot of mopping up on Iwo Jima. So it was a joint operation with Army, Navy, and Marine Corps personnel. And I said, it'd be great to use your life to be able to tell the story again and show what, you know, that freedom is not free. And he seemed to be very excited about doing that. And so I went into it, and unfortunately, I found that for the package put into for him, he should not have gotten the Medal of Honor. In fact, I found that all throughout his life, he is given to exaggerated sea tales, if you will, about his life. And unfortunately, a lot of those sea tales got into the official record when his package was moving up the chain of command to get the Medal of Honor. Well, what's interesting is that Admiral Nimitz and General Geiger was the Fleet Marine Force commander of all 6 divisions at the end of the war. So he and his board, and then Admiral Nimitz, you know, the Pacific Supreme Commander, and his board found that the evidence wasn't matching up with what was initially claimed that what he did. They saw that the package was flawed, and so they stopped it and did not send it up and did not approve it. Well, at the end of the war, after the atomic bombs worked with bringing peace to the world, Truman wanted to have a lot of alive Medal of Honor recipients at the White House. And so he basically put pressure on Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal, to get a few of the packages who had not had all the evidence gathered yet, and push them through so he could have a lot of alive guys at the Rose Garden to award medals to on October 5th, 1945. Many of you will know, I mean, whenever a Medal of Honor is tied around somebody's neck, it's a, you know, by the president, it is a big event, even today with Trump and Obama and Bush and so on. So Woody's basically medal got pulled away politically, and many of the people surrounding it to some degree from the outside thought eventually that evidence would come in, although Geiger and Nimitz were strongly against it, but they were outranked basically by the White House and the Supreme Commander pushing Forrestal, who Forrestal also outranked them, being the Secretary of the Navy. So it was a very controversial award. And unfortunately, when I found all the evidence there, and plus a lot of other lies that Woody had been given about his life all throughout his life, he has slapped a 5th District federal lawsuit against me to try to shut me up. But, thank God our U.S. Constitution and First Amendment and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson have been protecting me so far. And that the book has been, out for over a year and has been reviewed by very prominent individuals. I'm blessed to have forewords from 3 prominent Marine Corps generals, Commandant Al Gray, the 29th Commandant of the Marine Corps, 31st Commandant of the Marine Corps, Charles Krulak, and then former SITCOM Commander, General Anthony Zinni. And I also got the warm endorsement and review of John Hoffman, Colonel John Hoffman, who wrote Chesty, about Chesty Puller. So now getting to the Jewish theme, obviously with my Jewish heritage and being very proud of my German Jewish heritage and what that means for me as far as tzedakah and community and education and what we have done for the United States, I had a very keen interest to know what about the Jewish Marines that served on Iwo Jima. A lot of people don't realize that out of the 70,000 plus men who rotated on and off the island during that 36-day campaign from February 19th to basically March 26th of 1945, you had 1,500 Jewish Marines or Jewish corpsmen who were on that island and fought very bravely. And or you had people of Jewish descent. You probably had 1,500 people who considered themselves Jewish. And then you probably had a few other thousand that had Jewish background, but had their families had converted or they had converted. And so they were not registered as being Hebrew or Jewish or Israel. Those were usually the 3 titles that were usually put on dog tags to know how, unfortunately, to bury somebody or to minister to them when they in their time of need. So as I was looking into this, one thing that really kind of sparked my interest is Woody Williams, who is kind of the guy that I use to tell the larger story of the Pacific War and Japan's Holocaust and the battles of Guam and Iwo Jima, where he fought. One of the guys that really kind of opened his eyes that there were other people of different stripes, if you will, in America was his friend Philip Cohen. He was the first Jew he'd ever met. And this kind of got him thinking about other people in America, not being Christian or, not being white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And it was interesting to talk to him, that at first he had kind of a lot of aversion to Philip Cohen because he was a Jew. And then when he got to meet him, they became friends. It's kind of like the old phrase, it's very hard to hate somebody you break bread with. And I think that's one thing that I really found out with this research about the Jews and the Catholics and the Protestants that were all coming together, and blacks and whites and Latinos and Native Americans, that, you put them through 10 to 13 weeks of boot camp. You go through extensive training for months, and then you go through combat. It was an incredible gelling of American society at that time. I really believe without World War II, the momentum for the civil rights movement that we see in the 50s and especially in the 60s would not have been there, because a lot of people who were pushing this had seen that, when you come together from all different walks of life, that trumps a lot of racism. I mean, of course, the integration of the military with President Truman in 1948, right after the war, would not have happened if it were not for the war. And to see the justice of that policy and to see just how practical it was to some degree, but also how, we should really be focusing, although this wasn't really verbalized, but I think people were starting to kind of get a feel for this, that there's one race, the human race. And so that was an interesting story at the beginning with Woody Williams. And I had not really known about Rabbi Gittelsohn, one of the most I would say, favored sons of America and one of the most prominent or famous rabbis that this country has produced. But as I started researching more about Iwo Jima and the people who fought there, I started finding that, Medal of Honor recipient, Corporal Stein, for the Marine Corps, had, it looks like, Jewish background. The War Refugee Board was putting in information for him after his death for his family. And I'm trying to get the exact percentage, if you will, of his background, but a lot of people did not know about his potential Jewish background. I started finding, other people that were, very, very passionate about getting involved with the war, like Rabbi Gittelsohn. This guy, his name is Solomon Israel Bleckman, and he went into the correspondent units to try to write about this history, and he was passionate about fighting against fascism, and and a lot of Jewish Americans that I've started studying, like Bleckman and like Stein, we're feeling like, what, we got to step up to the plate here. We got a lot of evil in the world, and we got to get rid of these guys. And so as I started seeing the individual Marines with being able to put a name and a background and a history to them, Johnny Vlock from the Bronx, basically, and he was a semi-pro baseball player, and he was Jewish background as well. And he's getting, I believe he got a Silver Star and a Purple Heart, and since he played baseball, he was able to use grenades incredibly well. Yeah, there's Johnny Block, and get his men moving forward. And also, what's amazing about this guy is one day the Japanese started throwing grenades at him, and according to one report, he picked up a few dozen of them, like fielding them like grounders, and threw them immediately back at the Japanese. Now, you have a lot of guys doing this. Harrell, another Medal of Honor recipient from Iwo Jima, he did this and was successful several times until one grenade blew one hand off. And then with his remaining hand, he shot a few more Japanese, and then a couple more grenades came in, and with his other hand, he's throwing away the grenades. And then he was late with another one, lost both his hands. You see him getting his Medal of Honor from President Truman with 2 hooks, and he luckily survived. So, I mean, this was going on a lot. Johnny Vlock's, semi-pro baseball career helped him tremendously. And then also, when I was on the island in 2015, I met an Army Air Corps pilot, Jerry Yellen, who supposedly flew one of the last combat missions in a P-51 over Japan. And yeah, there he is in his uniform. We were just about to go to Iwo Jima, and I was talking to him about the anti-Semitism he encountered in the service. And at the beginning, a lot of guys were, raised with, the old Christian Catholic discriminatory beliefs, that we're Christ killers, and that we've rejected the favored son of God who came down and, died for our sins. And, Yellen was having a lot of problems with this. I mean, people need to realize that Vatican II, Nostra Aetate, that took place between 1962 and 65, that basically absolved us of deicide, killing God, didn't happen for 20 years until after World War II. And so a lot of these guys, these Jewish guys, I was very sensitive looking at the dynamic that was going on when they first entered and how people treated them versus how they were treated afterwards, and really focusing on that incredible gelling of America and beginning of more tolerance, if you will, because of bringing our boys together and focusing on the ethic that we should have here, that we're all Americans, we're all democratically minded. We should be focusing on being ethical humanists, regardless of our religious backgrounds. And Jerry had some really good insights for me, and he's in my book extensively, and gave me a lot of commentary and a lot of interesting insights into that development. Now, getting to Roland Gittelsohn, if the people that are listening today, if you have not read his eulogy that he gave at the 5th Marine Corps Division Cemetery, at the dedication of that cemetery, at the end of March 1945. You need to read it. My son and I, when we went to Iwo Jima in 2015, yeah, there he is. He's actually giving it there, The Purest Democracy, and that's from the National Archives in Washington, D.C., or College Park, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. Gittelsohn, when you read The Purest Democracy, they call it the Gettysburg Address of World War II. And it really is, just like the Gettysburg Address that Abraham Lincoln gave after the Battle of Gettysburg, telling us why it was important to preserve the Union, why it was sacred to fight for our democracy. Gittelsohn took it to a whole new level with The Purest Democracy, and it literally brings tears to your eyes when you read it. And when you know the tragedy of the story surrounding how he became famous, it makes it even that much more dramatic. Lee Mandel, a former captain in the Navy, was one of the fleet doctors for the Atlantic Fleet. He was stationed on the USS Truman and the USS George Bush. He is writing a second version of his book called The Unlikely Warrior, if people want to know more about Gittelsohn. But this is what's fascinating, and I went into using Lee Mandel's book and other archival material to really go into this controversy that I highlight in my book, because I'm thinking, what are we fighting for in World War II? What should we be fighting for today? Well, in World War II, especially, get rid of racism and discrimination and intolerance and bigotry. And we were fighting it within our own military to some degree. And of course, we were fighting against it with, Hirohito's and Mussolini and Hitler's legions. And, thank God we were successful. But, but we still had a lot of, improvement to do in our own military. And Gittelsohn's story is very dramatic in this respect. So Gittelsohn was in second command of the chaplaincy for the 5th Marine Corps Division. So when the dedication was going to be planned and organized, his superior, Captain Cuthrell, who was a Baptist minister and had been a career Navy guy, almost 20 years in the service, said, and he knew about his other chaplains. I mean, there was I think there were 6 Catholic priests. There were 6 Protestant, chaplains. Gittelsohn was the only Jewish rabbi. The only Jewish chaplain there, the only rabbi. And it's interesting. He's the first rabbi basically attached to the Marines. And that's also something kind of interesting about him. And what's also, on a side note, very quickly, and I'll tell you about this controversy with Captain Cuthrell and what he was doing. If you look at a lot of his writings and his sermons from the 20s and 30s, Rabbi Gittelsohn is a really kind of fanatic pacifist, hates war, thinks it's totally immoral, thinks we need to do all we can to protest it. Nobody should ever pick up, a rifle to fight. Very unrealistic view. He had some very good moral arguments, but they were just not practical for realpolitik, if you will. It kind of reminds me of the famous story of a young pacifist man arguing with Trotsky, saying, war is immoral, it's horrible, we should do away with it, ban it, war is disgusting. And Trotsky looked at this young man with his wise experience and said, son, you may not be interested in war, but war is very interested in you. And Gittelsohn started seeing that reality in the late 30s as Mussolini and Hitler started taking over all these countries, and the disgusting, ideologies they were spreading across the world. And, finally Gittelsohn said, I got to do something, if not me, who? If not, now, when, to quote some of our phraseology from, our wise fathers in the Siddur. So he decided to join and really enjoyed the camaraderie through the training and so on. Did experience some anti-Semitism along the way, but nothing like what he was about to see on Iwo Jima. So he gets, well, I'll back up. He did experience some, and it was really maybe not necessarily because he was Jewish, although that didn't help him in the following situations, was that when he became a rabbi stationed out on the West Coast, he started bringing blacks and whites together, talking about what are they fighting for? What type of country are they making? Which was really unheard of. A lot of Marine Corps officers and naval officers and Navy chaplains were against him from bringing children of God together, blacks and whites. But you just see how far reaching he was with his vision. And, that he really did embrace Tikkun Olam, let's heal this world, let's bring people together, and let's realize we're part of one race. He was incredible humanitarian, and very tolerant, very wise. And he had a brilliant speaking style and voice. So now getting up, we've gone all the way through Iwo Jima. He has been in the front lines ministering to Marines during the whole battle, seen people get blown up and killed right before his eyes. He's burying people all the time, ministering last rites, the Shema, prayers with the Protestants. I mean, just incredible American and an incredible patriot, and being there with all his boys. At the end, getting back to Captain Cottrell, they're about to have this memorial service for the 5th Marine Corps Cemetery, a dedication. And after the general, General Rocky, was to give his speech, Cottrell had placed Rabbi Gittelsohn to give basically the religious service for this. Part of it was he was second in command, Gittelsohn was. And the other part was Cottrell knew that he was a very gifted orator. And so he wanted him to do it. Well, the bigoted, racist, if you will, Catholic priest basically said, no way. And here again, they came from a doctrine that was preached all the time that, Jews are Christ killers, they're going to hell. And they're also making fun of Gittelsohn. Hey, he's a Negro lover. He's a communist. I mean, all these other things. And they're saying, and most of the markers in the cemetery are crosses. They're not stars of David. So they basically said, if you do this, we are going to boycott the service, and we're going to take all our Catholic boys elsewhere. And then half of the Protestant ministers basically said the same thing. And Cottrell was in a dilemma, but he said, you know what? I'm not going to back down. Gittelsohn, you're going to continue on. Well, Gittelsohn saw that Cottrell was going to do the moral thing, but he also realized this would probably be professional suicide for him. So he said, hey, I appreciate what you're doing, but no harm, no foul here. After the general gives his talk, let each one of the representative from the faith, and of course, I'm the only rabbi, so I'll do the Jewish prayer, but have a Catholic priest do a Catholic prayer and have a Protestant do a Protestant prayer, and then say we're going to have a breakout session. The Protestants are going to go over to the left, Catholics over to the right, I'll stay in the center. And for each, for each group, the Marines who have that religious affiliation should go there, and then we'll do our own dedication with those groups. And Captain Cottrell was very appreciative of this with Gittelsohn. And so later on, Gittelsohn gives his purest democracy to a very small group. It's kind of hard to come by the numbers, but it looks like there was about 25 to 30 guys there. Now, this is what's fascinating. 3 of the Protestant ministers were so disgusted by their bigoted, racist fellow Protestant Protestant chaplains and the Catholic, the priests and the Catholic chaplains, that they said, you know what, we're going to boycott both those services and we're going to go support Rabbi Gittelsohn. And one of the Protestant ministers was so taken with his talk that he went up to him afterwards and said, can I have your talk? Can I see it? I want to copy it. And Rabbi Gittelsohn said, sure, and gave him the 3 pieces of paper. And that Protestant minister was so taken with this talk that he went down to the beach and he found a mimeograph machine, I think on a hospital ship, that was, anchored right offshore, and he made thousands and thousands of copies of it. And then he went around and started handing it off to all these Marines who were disembarking to return to their ships and go back to either Guam or Hawaii. Well, these young men who are reading this get so taken with it, they're mailing it to their families and friends. And before you know it, this is getting into the hands of CBS and NBC radio and so on. And all of a sudden, Rabbi Gittelsohn becomes an overnight sensation because of this act of, bigotry and persecution against him. He actually became one of the most famous chaplains of American history, especially in World War II, so well known that he was the only rabbi that was put on the Interfaith Council that President Truman put together, first U.S. president to do so. So he became, overnight sensation because of this. And so I go into these type of issues that this event brings up, but I also then highlight the bravery of American Jewish boys like Bleckman, who I mentioned, or Tony Stein, who I mentioned as well, or Johnny Flock, and Rabbi Gittelsohn or Jerry Yellen. And then, kind of bring out once again that, hey, we still got a long way to go until we realize we're part of one race, the human race. We're getting better, but boy, we still have a long ways to go until Tikkun Olam. And that Rabbi Gittelsohn, for every American Jewish boy or woman who goes into the service should know their heritage in some respects. And that part of that heritage should always be Rabbi Roland Gittelsohn and what he stood for on Iwo Jima and what he did. Here's one of the most fanatic pacifists, if you will, from the 30s that ends up in one of the most brutal battles, not only of World War II, but in all of human history. I mean, to put it in context, 7,000 of our boys died in 36 days of combat. More American boys died in that 1 month of conflict on Iwo Jima than all the dead we've had in Gulf War I, Gulf War II, and in Afghanistan the last 30 years. So, it was percentage-wise, it was an incredibly bloody battle. And it's the only major battle of the Pacific War where the Japanese inflicted more casualties on us than we inflicted on them. They inflicted 19,000 wounded and 7,000 dead. We killed basically 20,000 of them and took prisoners a little over 1,000. So, in my book, I have this huge theme that I talk about, the American Jewish experience. I talk about Woody Williams and his controversial medal and why he should not have gotten it. Then I talk about Guam and Iwo Jima. And what I was shocked by is how few of the boxes of material, I mean, there's hundreds of boxes of documentation in the National Archives. But you would think Iwo Jima, one of the most famous battles, it has, the picture of one of the most famous pictures of war, the flag raising on Mount Suribachi. You would think that all those boxes of documentation from the 5th Amphibious Corps, which was in control of that operation at that time, or from the 3rd, 4th, or 5th Marine Corps divisions, or their battalions and regiments and their documents, would have been gone over with a fine-tooth comb. Well, I was finding tons of boxes left and right where there were packets in there of documentation that had been stapled from 1945. I had to go to some of the archivists and get them to take the staples out to get into the documents. Some of the documents were great. Their correspondence, fit reps, after action reports. And you would think any historian worth his salt would have gone through that. So I was just it kind of reminded me of what my professor at Yale University, Henry Turner, said. He says, most historians are really lazy. They go to a library and they take 3 books and they make 1 book out of it, instead of going to the source material and looking at the primary sources. So once again, Henry Turner's theory was proven right about one of the most famous battles of World War II, Iwo Jima. And I think I have one of the most definitive works on Iwo Jima in that battle for 2 reasons. One is I really went into General Erskine, who was the commander of the 3rd Marine Division, and he was in the middle of the island, basically taking out the guts of General Kuribayashi, the Japanese general who was in command of the garrison there. Took out his guts, and I really talked about how he did it so effectively, and that he's one of the fathers of amphibious warfare. I go into that also, that the Marines really gave amphibious warfare to the Allies during World War II, and that's not a hyperbolic statement. They were the only ones really focusing on this in the 20s and 30s. And General Erskine was one of the main thinkers of amphibious warfare. And then to see this brilliant mind and lead a division so effectively on Iwo Jima was incredible. So I really do a case study of that division, talking about the battle there. Also, I got to go to the Japanese archives, and I've never had this happen before. I've done archival research in Israel, Sweden, Germany, France, England, and all throughout America. And I a lot of times write off and ask for different files so I know what to look for when I get there. Well, when I did that with the Japanese military archive in Tokyo, I sent the head archivist, Director Sato, what I wanted to look at. And I gave him some of the questions I was exploring. Well, when I got to the archive, he had almost like a racquetball court size room quartered off for me. And he had each one of my questions taped on a table, kind of hanging down, and then the files behind each one. And for 3 days, he would walk from one pile to the next pile and go over the documents with me to answer my questions. And to my knowledge, I'm the first one to see a lot of the reports that the Japanese were sending back in the summer of 44 and the fall of 44, before we invaded them in February 19th of 1945, how they were designing the island. And I think I'm the first one to come up with some really interesting pieces of information. Like, for example, out of the 2,200 man garrison he had, or 2,180 that he had, 2,000 of them were combat engineers. It was the most heavily engineered division in World War II. And they built an underground fortress. They had 11 miles of tunnels underneath the island, and the island was 8 square miles, so basically 1/3 the size of Manhattan. And they took all their men literally into the island. It was so difficult to kill them because they weren't on top of it; they were in it. And 1/3 of all Japanese that we killed by incinerating them using the flamethrower and flamethrower tanks. And that's another thing that I think I really show light on that a lot of people haven't looked at in World War II is I think I'm one of the #1 experts on Japanese flamethrower tactics. We built over 20,000 of the Mark II, the second generation version that had the matches in the front system instead of electrical lighting system. I had 4.5 gallons of fuel, had a central tank of compressed air, or most often nitrogen, which is not flammable. It had basically 9 seconds of burst that it could send out flame 20 to 30 yards on and it could spread out 20, 30 yards as well, 3,500 degree heat. And that's the only way we could kill the Japanese, is by taking flamethrowers up close to their pillboxes and then pouring that flame or spraying that flame into their apertures of their bunkers. And this is another thing that the Japanese archive showed me that really I got definitive numbers on. There were 5,000 bunkers, pillboxes, and reinforced caves on Iwo Jima that we had to take out. It was this human anthill that, you hit one area, they would just go to another pillbox or another tunnel, wait till you finish thinking you took that out, and then you go move forward, and then they come back into it and hit you from the rear. I mean, it was a brilliant strategy that Kuribayashi, implemented there with his engineers. And he was one of the most ruthless and one of the most brilliant generals that I've documented from the Japanese, the Imperial Japanese Army. And so I learned more about him as well. And one thing that you don't get from Flags of Our Fathers are letters from Iwo Jima that Clint Eastwood brought out in 2006 about the Battle of Iwo Jima and about General Kuribayashi, is that he was a war criminal. He was a chief of staff of the 23rd Army when it took over Hong Kong in December of 1941. And within a few weeks of battle and occupation, you had 50,000 civilians who were murdered and at least 10,000 women who were raped. And I've been able to document between the ages of 6 months and 90 years of age. And he didn't care. I mean, he would bring in comfort women left and right on cattle cars afterwards for his troops. I mean, the guy was an evil, horrible human being, brilliant general. And here, I told you a little bit about my problems with Woody Williams. Well, I interviewed the grandson of General Kuribayashi, who is the Honorable Shinto, of the Liberal Democratic Party. He was in Shinzo Abe's cabinet, and he's responsible for keeping the doors open for us to come and visit Iwo Jima. Well, when I interviewed him and went over a lot of this troubling information, instead of him supporting me and supporting the truth and admitting that his grandfather did a lot of bad things, he tried to shut me up. He spoke ill of me to a lot of groups here, and he even threatened the Iwo Jima American Association that if they didn't do something about my work, he may shut down the island to Americans, which would violate our treaty obligations that we had from 1968 when we gave the island back over to the Japanese. So I'm having a lot of controversy writing this book and just trying to tell the truth. But I think when I went into this, I found a lot of historical information that nobody really knew about, especially about the islands and the island of Iwo Jima and the main personalities that created this history. Another thing, and I'll open it up for the last 15 minutes or 17 minutes of the time we have here to questions. The last thing that I was really passionate about is the Battle of Guam. One of the largest banzais happened there against us, where, depending on if you want to combine the banzai from Orte Peninsula and then from Banzai Ridge that hit the Americans, that's 8,000 Japanese that hit them. But if you just look at the one that hit them on the 25th of July, 1944, you had 5,000 screaming Japanese that came over Nimitz Hill, or the Banzai Ridge, and hit our boys, and is one of the most hair-raising battles that Americans ever been in. And what I found very interesting as a Holocaust historian that I was horrified by, and that most people don't know about, is that the Japanese set up 7 concentration camps on that island and killed 10% of the entire population of the Chamorro people. And a lot of people don't know that American nationals, I should say, they weren't necessarily citizens, but they're American nationals, were stuck in concentration camps under the Japanese and were being slaughtered and killed. And had we not invaded when we did and gone a few more weeks, with how the lack of provisions that were being given to the people in those camps, if you looked at, what would have happened to them had a couple more weeks gone by, it might have been 20 or 30% of the population would have died off. As is, 10% is, 1 is too many, but 10% is just, mind numbing. And a lot of people don't know about this. So, if I was finding a lot of files in the National Archives that hadn't been open about Iwo Jima, you can only imagine how many unopened files I found out about Guam. So I think I also have one of the definitive works on the Battle of Guam, the concentration camps there, the Battle of Iwo Jima, Japan's Holocaust in general, because I just talk about, that's one thing. I went over to Nanking, I went over to Shanghai, I studied, all throughout Chinese archives, and I guesstimate that a minimum of 22 million Asians were slaughtered by the Japanese by going to the Chinese National Archives and the Japanese archives during World War II. Basically double the amount of Hitler. Hitler killed 6 million Jews. Everybody knows that number, but they don't know that an additional 5.7 were slaughtered as well, primarily Russian POWs, but you also had socialists and homosexuals and Jehovah's Witnesses and so on. The Japanese murdered twice as many people, and they were doing it systematically in many respects. And it's mass murder. You can't really call it genocide because they weren't focusing on a particular ethnicity or people like Hitler was with us Jews. But they were doing mass murder at a huge scale, and that's what Holocaust means, mass murder. And I was shocked by how little people understand that aspect of the other Holocaust going on in the other side of the world during World War II. And I also was absolutely disgusted with the Japanese military, the Japanese government, and the Japanese academic environment for not admitting this, asking for apologies, and giving reparations. By way of comparison, Germany has paid 90 billion in reparations since World War II. Japan has paid 1 billion, and they slaughtered twice as many. In Germany, all throughout, the archives are open, and there's monuments all over the place to the victims. There's not one monument in Japan for the victims, like Nanking, the rape of Nanking, the rape of Canton, the rape of Hong Kong. So I really go into this as well in this book, and that's also the Jewish, passion in me to talk about the disgraceful behavior of these fascists during World War II, not only in Nazi Germany for my Jewish brothers and sisters who were slaughtered there, but also to talk about this in general for also my brothers and sisters of humanity over in China and Indonesia and Vietnam, where Japan was behaving extremely poorly. So these are the things that I talk about. I'm blessed that General Krulak said I take the tactical, operational, and strategic level of the Pacific War and I tie it all together. So I give you the feel for what's going on, 10,000 foot view strategically. And then I come down to like a Band of Brothers unit, Woody's platoon, and you get to know all these guys and what they're doing. And then I expand back out to the larger picture, amphibious warfare, how that was being used. And I come down to the landings on the beach at Iwo Jima and Guam. And I think that is something that is unique about this book and my research as well. So, Michael, thank you so much for setting this up. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to me. There's 12 minutes. I'm sure I see there's already 7 or 6 questions. So I'll be happy to do my best to answer them in the remaining time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bryan. It was fascinating. So let's get to some of the questions. Norman Gardner asked, do you know how many Jewish Marines were killed on Iwo Jima? That's always a tough question.
It's difficult to I obviously wanted to answer that question. So when you're looking at around 10% of all people who were rotated on and off the island were killed, then you can extrapolate from that if you had 1,500 Marines and sailors that were on that island at any given time, you're looking at probably anywhere between 150 to 200. Now, the reason why I put it up a little bit higher is because, Marines, Jews as a percentage were a higher percentage than Catholic and Protestant boys. And many of them were very eager, I found, to be in the front lines to prove themselves. And we know about this phenomenon to some degree. So I put it up a little bit higher than 10%, maybe 160, 170, but that's probably a very accurate estimation of how many Jewish boys were in the soil of Iwo Jima when those graveyards were dedicated at the end of March.
A couple questions about you giving talks. Are you still doing Hitler's Jewish soldier talks? And people are asking if you give talks for synagogues.
Yeah, it's amazing how strong those legs are of Hitler's Jewish soldiers. It came out 19 years ago, and I've, of course, written up some follow works, The Lies of Hitler's Jewish Soldiers in 2009, and then The Rabbi Saved by Hitler Soldiers in 2016, which, some of these guys of Jewish descent actually rescued Rebbe Schneerson of Chabad, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, the father-in-law and second cousin of Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who a lot of Jews know about. And I document this rescue, and it's a remarkable story of how our U.S. government worked with the Nazi Secret Service to rescue the highest ranking Jewish rabbi in the world at that time, Rebbe Schneerson, and get him to America. And that's why we have Lubavitch at 77 in Brooklyn, New York. But to answer that question, yes, I give lectures and Zoom meetings all the time about Hitler's Jewish soldiers. And that seems to be in Jewish communities a very interesting topic that people want to explore and hear how I found these men, because I interviewed almost 500 men of Jewish descent who served in the Nazi, or Jews who served in the Nazi military during World War II, and it teaches us an awful lot about the Holocaust, World War II, and Nazi Germany, and gets us asking questions that are really tough of the history.
Gary Ginsberg asks, can you comment on the book Comrades Betrayed, which is Michael Garen's book about the Jewish World War I veterans and how they were treated under the Nazi regime?
Yeah, that's a sad chapter in humanity's history, and then especially in Jewish, Western Jewish traditions in history. So you had 100,000 German Jews who served in the German military in World War I. 12,000 of them died. In the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, you had 300,000 Jews who served. 25,000 of them died. To put that into context, the 37,000 Jews who died for Germany and Austria in World War I eclipsed the number of Jews who have died total since the founding of Israel. 1948 to now. More Jews died for those two countries than Israel. And then, of course, we know what their countrymen do to them, 2 decades later. So it is a very sad story of betrayal. A lot of these men did not think that this was going to happen to their families. An unknown person, he was a quote unquote half Jew. His name was Willie Rohr. He developed all the stormtrooper tactics. In fact, the term stormtroopers is his finding. I mean, George Lucas has him to thank for that term. And he was a brilliant mind of taking combined arms, especially on a platoon level, to meet whatever he was going to find with the French. He did most of his tactic on Hartmann's Weilerkopf in the Vogesen. Brilliant mind. But this is just one guy of many who contributed dramatically to the German military and German tactical development, German military philosophy, and so on, that were horribly mistreated, or their families were horribly mistreated just 20 years later with the advent of Adolf Hitler. So this topic needs to be explored even more. More and more research has been going on the last 10 or 15 years that I've seen on this subject matter than when I was studying it back in the 90s, which I'm happy to see. These men need to be honored, need to be looked at. My dean at Yale University, Dean Susan Hauser, her family were lucky to get out of Austria in 1938. They're one of the few ones that did. And her father was a medical doctor in the Austrian military in World War I. And he was being mistreated. Her mother was arrested and thrown in jail. It is a sick chapter, like I said, of human history, and deserves much more studies because it tells us an awful lot about human nature.
Yeah, I should mention, keep an eye on our schedule. In the fall, I believe we're going to have Rabbi Jack Bromberg speak, who has a new book coming out on Richard Stern, who was a German World War I Iron Cross recipient who comes to the U.S. and joins the Army, fights in World War II, and receives the Silver Star fighting for the U.S. So this is a remarkable story of.
Well, and people need to also, on that note, need to read The Pity of It All by Amos. I mean, that book is phenomenal. And talking about the subject matter of just how blindsided we were as a people when 1933 came on the scene.
Nachman Simon, how did you get the Japanese documents translated? Or did you have?
Well, that's what was. I thought I was going to have to make copies of this and then go find a graduate student in America that was Japanese, and then have he or she translate the documents. That was so remarkable. Not only did Director Sato sit with me, but Colonel Yasunaga also sat with me, and he was still in uniform in the Japanese military. And both these men sat with me for 3 days and translated the documents for me. And so that's how I did that research. What would have taken me probably weeks, if not months, to ask a graduate student to look at, because these guys were both experts in the documents and expert in the vocabulary. They were able to really give me incredible local color on these documents to understand what Kuribayashi was doing and what the perspective of that island and the development of that island was from the Japanese point of view, which to my knowledge, nobody has documented that historically.
Gary Glick, how can we get the word out? And then he points out his wearevets.us website, which is a website they use to benefit veterans.
How do we get the word out about what?
I guess just the story of the Jews and the vets on Iwo Jima.
Oh, well, I have this book, Flamethrower. It's on Amazon, and also it's on my website, bryanmarkrigg.com, www.bryanmarkrigg, just my name.com. And that's how I think we get it out. Thank you so much for that plug. But that's one way to get the story out about Jews that did serve at Iwo Jima, the ones that I were able to find, and talk about that Jewish experience and Gittelsohn's amazing chapter in American history that is documented in my book. And I have, here again, I have to thank Lee Mandel for his incredible research on Gittelsohn that he wrote in Unlikely Warrior, which he will be bringing out a second edition here this next year, which is good.
Yeah, I should point out Harvey Weiner mentioned in the chat that Roland Gittelsohn's daughter is married to a JWV member in his post in Wellesley, Massachusetts.
Great.
David Niekerk, can you speak a little more about the political pushback on your research and conclusions of the book? I'm not clear about why you're getting so much pushback. And maybe you can pair this with Robin Godfrey's question as well. I'm from West Virginia and aware of various honors and recognition of Woody Williams. Briefly, what is the primary problem with his account of his exploits on Iwo Jima?
Okay, so I'll take Woody and then I'll go to Kuribayashi. So Woody, I just told you, ladies and gentlemen, that there were 5,000 reinforced emplacements, pillboxes, bunkers, and reinforced cave entrances that we had to take out. So taking out these places was a common occurrence of guys left and right. A guy taking out 2 or 3 in a day was really, quote unquote, no big deal for a day on Iwo Jima. I mean, still incredibly heroic, took a lot of bravery, took a lot of skill. And Woody is indeed a hero. He's just a very flawed one. So he's just a typical young, uneducated, boy from the heartland of America that got really excited about his survival. And the day that he did all his events, which was the 23rd of February, 1945, what I can ascertain is he took out probably 2 pillboxes, maybe 3, but I'm pretty certain it was just 2, and that he killed anywhere between 6 to 8 Japanese. Very good day on Iwo Jima, but this is Bronze Star, Silver Star worthy when you look at what medals were given for which deeds on Iwo Jima. Well, he's one of the few guys of his company that survives. He's, one of like 12 out of 278 of the original contingent. So when he gets back to Guam and they're ramping up to invade Japan, he becomes one of the leading flamethrower instructors there. And he starts talking about his exploits, and his 4-pound bass becomes 20 pounds. Instead of taking out 2 pillboxes, he's taking out 7. And instead of killing 6 to 8 Japanese in 1 pillbox alone, he killed 21 Japanese, and he counted them all. I mean, you have these oral testimonies from him. And so when he's telling somebody, he took 21 dead, he killed 21 dead Japanese in 1 pillbox, and he's telling them, hey, I took out 7. He's allowing people to extrapolate from there that, man, he killed out 100, 120 guys. Now, there were a few Marines that were doing that on Iwo Jima. That I document, just incredible. Jacobson, look up that Medal of Honor recipient guy. That guy was a one-man killing machine in one day, taking out over 70 guys minimum, and just a tough warrior. But it's all documented. You look at his Medal of Honor endorsements, and you look at the affidavits that support the endorsements, it all matches. So what happened with Woody is he's shooting off his mouth, and through telephone, this story takes on a life of its own. His commander writes up the endorsement from the story he hears, and then he gets the scientific method reversed, and then he goes out and tries to find affidavits to support it. He hadn't seen his wife in a few years. He sloppily kind of put it together, threw it up the chain of command, and then left to go home to see his family. And then, like I said, when it worked its way up through regimental, divisional, a corps, Fleet Marine Force, and then Nimitz office, they started seeing problems with the evidence, and they wanted more evidence. And the guy that could have given all the evidence in the world, platoon leader, who got injured a week later after the events that Woody did for the Medal of Honor, and he was in a hospital in Virginia, and he was specifically asked to endorse this and to write what Woody did. He refused not once, but twice to endorse Woody, Woody's own platoon leader. So that was kind of controversial and a bureaucratic mess that I found. But what's even more embarrassing is Woody's disgraceful behavior afterwards. Once I found out what he knows that his exaggerated tales got him this, and I document this very thoroughly in the book of showing the justification for me being able to make such a claim. Once he figured that out, he tried to force me to sign a document with him. They gave him censoring rights. He wanted money. And then he slapped a 5th District federal lawsuit against me when I said, no, the truth is the truth. Woody, why don't you tell us what really happened? And so that's the controversy with Woody. And it's a really sad story, but he lied about a lot of things. One of the things that makes veterans angrier more than anything else is that he lied about being with a comrade when he died. And he did it to make himself look good and make people cry and really feel endeared to him, because he talks about going to the family after the war and telling them all about his death. And he brought his new bride to impress her. And I found out that he made the whole story up, which is really sad. And I had a general, Medal of Honor general, tell me that that was the most disappointing thing he found about Woody, not about the exaggeration, we can kind of understand about with the Medal of Honor, how that story got out of control, but that he actually consciously made up a tale about being with a comrade to make himself look better. That was unforgivable. And, people need to realize, when you get the Medal of Honor in America, you get a tax-free stipend every month. Woody has probably gotten over $1 million, maybe even 2 million, tax-free through his life. Medal of Honor recipients get anywhere between $3,000 to, I think, $6,000 tax-free per year. So he's benefited financially for this. And, it's kind of like fraud by omission. If he knows he shouldn't have gotten it and he hasn't come forward, there are some problems there. And I document this as well. Now, getting to Kuribayashi, Japanese hate to lose face. They never speak ill of their ancestors. So there was two things that I butted heads when it came to Kuribayashi's grandson. One, I'm finding out that General Kuribayashi was a war criminal, a rapist. He dealt with human chattel at one of the most worst documented times of history about violence against women. What the Japanese military was doing, they raped everywhere. They had brothels. They killed these women a lot of times after raping them for several weeks, if not, days. Just the disgusting military. And Kuribayashi was one of the main leaders of this. So his grandson didn't want me bringing that out, and he really hammered me with it. And then I also didn't probably set the tone right of trying to have intellectual discussion with him, when I was very upset when I found out that he's responsible for all the Shinto shrine ceremonies that are done on Iwo Jima today when bones are found. Now, we have around 250 to 300 MIAs still on that island. We still have Marine and sailor boys buried in that island. So when the bones are picked up, I asked them, why haven't we been checking the DNA of those bones? And if we find Caucasian DNA, we try to give those bones back to America and let them have the American burials here at our home and respect our dead, and not burn them up in your Shinto shrines with your Japanese guys. Well, when he admitted there was no DNA testing going on our boys, I said, that's not right. How do we change that? And so he didn't take too kindly of me saying that he was doing something that was improper, because they don't test the bones, which I think is disgraceful. So I didn't have much of a filter when I was talking to him. But I also, by the time I got to his office in Tokyo, I found so much stuff about his grandfather. And this guy who's a politician who's looked into this, who helped Clint Eastwood make his movies, if he didn't know about this about his grandfather, and I was the first one to tell him, then he's really a kind of stupid politician not to look into the family's background, if you will, and know the guy that he puts on posters all the time to promote his political campaigns. He has a picture. It's like somebody of Eichmann or Heydrich or Hitler running in office in Germany, having pictures of that guy on a poster. He should know more about who he's promoting to show, hey, I'm a Japanese patriot, just like my grandfather. So that created a brouhaha, if you will, for me here in the States with his American contacts, as well as with the contacts that I had in Japan. But, my job as a historian is to tell the truth, figure out what's going on. And if, these guys can't handle that, that just shows the lack of moral integrity on their parts.
Okay, on the more on Japanese behavior, and have you addressed the Korean comfort women from Michael Berman?
Yeah. I talk about just the comfort women in general. Now, the Korean comfort women are horrible. We have more documentation on that. It's a very horrible. So they had from 1910 to 1945 to brutalize. Oh, Michael, it says my internet connection is unstable. Can you see me?
Yeah, you went out for a second, but you're good.
Okay.
Now.
Yeah, so Japan was there for 3.5 decades, brutalizing Korea and raping its women, and they're disgraceful and not admitting it to the extent of what they really did there. But they did this everywhere they went. I've never studied a modern military in my life that everywhere they went, they raped everything. The rape in Nanking is just a tip of the iceberg. As I looked into this, every city they went into, they went what's called girl hunting, and they enjoyed that. And so, I addressed the violence against women that the Japanese military did, and their disgraceful behavior since World War II of not admitting it.
From Bob Garrell, I thought that more Americans were killed on Okinawa than Iwo Jima. You didn't mention Okinawa.
Percentage-wise, we lost more for the men that deployed and how many killed we had. I mean, we deployed a lot more people on Okinawa than Iwo Jima. Well over 100,000 men, and we I think it was 250,000, 250,000 men to take out the 100,000 man garrison there. So yeah, number-wise, we lost a lot more on Okinawa. Percentage-wise, Iwo Jima was the most bloody battle that we had.
A couple of people wanted to pay tribute to Marines. My neighbor in St. Louis, Marine Corporal Joe Parisi, 23 years old, enlisted in January, died on Iwo, 10 March 45. Just wanted to mention his name even if he wasn't Jewish. Happy to do that. Happy to pay tribute to Corporal Joe Parisi. Jonathan Sherman pointing out he had an uncle who was a U.S. Army Signal Corps photographer. One of the places he was stationed was Iwo, and he believes that his family still has boxes of his photos. Some are probably from Iwo.
Well, please make scans of those if you haven't. Get copies of the scans and get in touch with me. Let's get it to the Marine Corps Historical Society, and then let's also get it to the National Archives. So let's have other copies out there. It's amazing how much stuff I have found, because I went in and I conducted 60 interviews with veterans or veterans' families, and the stuff I found in their closets and so on, once again, was invaluable to my research. Half of my footnotes cite sources that, to my knowledge, have never seen the light of day. And I have 3,145 footnotes.
Yeah, I noticed you numbered your footnotes sequentially throughout rather than breaking it out by chapters. I was like, wow, you really notice how many footnotes there are when you do it that way. Mm. And we do have archival resources at the museum here as well. I should point that out for Jewish soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen. Jerry Alberstein, do you realize that if the Navy Marines knew about the A-bomb, Iwo Jima never would have happened? Roughly speaking, the number of U.S. killed in action there was equal to the number of B-29 air crewmen saved.
That's a misnomer. I mean, that's a mistake, and that's been in a lot of literature. So there's two things that this gentleman brings out that's very important to explore, and I thank him for it. The first is, we didn't know the A bombs were going to even work, and nobody really even had knowledge. I mean, Nimitz was briefed on it to some degree, but they didn't know if it was going to bring about a surrender. The Japanese were so fanatic. We firebombed Tokyo in March of 1945 and killed more people there than we did in Nagasaki or Hiroshima, and it still didn't slow them down. So that it worked, that's great. And they did make Iwo Jima superfluous then. We took it for reasons that were never realized. The reasons for it, and you got to look at Robert Burrell's book, Ghost of Iwo Jima, was to get P-51 groups there to help attack Japan and escort B-29s. But that it saved 25,000 airmen is a falsehood. It was a justification given after the war to find a political reason, quote unquote, that was palatable for Americans to justify the carnage that happened on Iwo Jima. But when there were, every plane had 11 men. So, for them to say that 2,400 planes were saved when there was only 2,000 B-29s to begin with in the Pacific theater, it shows you that, this was hyperbolic speech and trying to prove too much to justify our 7,000 dead boys. Looking at Richard Frank's research and downfall, as well as Robert Burrell's work and the Ghost of Iwo Jima, you're looking at around 7,000 to 8,000 airmen that probably benefited from that island. Now, could their planes made it onto Saipan and Guam and not landed there when they had fuel problems or engine problems or whatnot? Maybe, maybe not. But the best you can really say is maybe that island helped save 7,000 or 8,000. So not nearly as much as people have said. And I go into this in my book and bring out the new research, especially from Robert Burrell. That's actually a myth that has been promoted way too long, and that's not true.
Related question from Franklin Paulson. How was it decided to invade Iwo Jima?
So, you had a fight between Nimitz and MacArthur. And the more I learn about MacArthur, I just can't stand the guy at all. Nimitz luckily won this fight because, MacArthur wanted to go up through Taiwan, obviously wanted to take Philippines, needed Peleliu and so on. But he wanted to take Taiwan, but he lost that battle. And Nimitz said, hey, we want to get Iwo Jima and then have that first staging ground and then get Okinawa and then go on to Japan. And so it was literally, to just give a simplified version, because it's much more complicated than this. And I go into this in my book of all the reasons why. But basically, we're just looking at stepping stones, getting closer to Japan and having bases and stationary aircraft carriers, if you will, to help us with our power projection. And we thought Iwo Jima was going to be an easy takeover. We only thought it was going to take a few days and maybe a few hundred dead. Little did we know what the fight was going to be on our hands. But that's been the main reason why they wanted to take it.
Ivan Vamos, another family tribute. My grandfather Mani Vamos, was a World War I officer beaten near to death by the Hungarian army soldiers in 1942. My uncles managed to get out of Hungary in 38 and 39. Henry Bob Leon joined U.S. Army Air Corps as an aerial photographer, and Otto Leon was a combat infantryman and landed in the Normandy invasion. Ivan Vamos, Holocaust survivor who got to the U.S. in 47 and served as a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy from 60 to 62. Thanks, Ivan.
Great.
Norm Stone, will this webinar be on YouTube? Yeah, we did record this, and assuming everything turned out okay with the recording, we will have it up on our YouTube channel. We'll send out a link to this and to the book on Amazon and any other information in a follow-up email to everyone who registered. So people should be all look for those links coming into your inbox, as well as on YouTube and elsewhere. Michael Werner, how many Japanese military and civilian leaders stood trial for war crimes, and how many were executed?
So you have major execution of war criminals of, I think it's 1,068. And all of them are enshrined at the Yakusuni Shrine in Japan. It's like having a cathedral in the middle of Berlin to Goering, Eichmann, Goebbels, and all those Mengele horrible types that the Nazis produced. So the Japanese revere their war criminals. They worship them. We actually executed more Japanese, but they were in control of a lot more people, and they did a lot more crimes than the Nazis. More heads should have rolled after World War II. I mean, Germany at the height was in control of around 400 million people in Europe. Japan at its height was in control of 650 million people. The size of California, a landmass the size of California took over 1/7 of the circumference of the earth. And everywhere they went, they immediately started doing crimes. So you had a lot of A, B, and C, level criminals. But, the major executions were, I believe, 1,068 Japanese were executed after war for war crimes.
Okay, I think this is going to have to be the last one. We're just about out of time. But Jonathan Goldman asked about delayed awards of the Medal of Honor. He points out the 24 that President Obama awarded after review of Hispanic, African American, and Jewish service members in 2014, and that was the one where Leonard Kravitz not received it. Additional honors have been bestowed to Jewish veterans. His father, Robert Goldman, just had a Coast Guard cutter named for him in March. So that I remember reading about that, and we're glad to see that your father received the honor he deserved with that Coast Guard cutter named after it. Can you comment on others that have been bestowed in recent years?
Yeah, I'm working on one guy. His name is Harry Jackson. He jumped on a grenade, lost an eye, an arm, and a leg. And you have 7 Medal of Honor recipients out of the 27 that were given for guys on Iwo Jima. 7 of them were for guys who jumped on grenades. Now, one guy survived it, Jack Lucas. He jumped on 2 grenades. Luckily, one only went off. And he kept all his body parts, but he got the Medal of Honor. So I'm just like, from that president, if that's what gets you a Medal of Honor in Iwo Jima, when it's put up through the proper chain of command with the evidence, Harry Jackson should get it. But it's very difficult to get it for people without witnesses. Now, with the 442nd Japanese regiment that fought the Nazis in World War II that was reviewed under President Clinton. And then the other groups that were reviewed with Obama. The acts were well documented, but they didn't require what is still required today of eyewitnesses or a officer from the chain of command to put it in. So many of us, meaning minorities or people with persecuted backgrounds, were lucky if they had shown, like Kravitz and so on, were able to show heroic deeds. They didn't have to go through the same, jumping through all the hoops to get it. So it's almost like, it's unfair to all those guys that are Protestant and Catholic or white, if you will, that don't come under those categories, that did just as much as a lot of these other guys. They do deserve the Medal of Honor, but they don't get consideration because they're not, they weren't persecuted. Now, on the other side, it's kind of like, hey, we got to do more for these guys because they had such a hard time, during their service and because of persecution. So, there's two sides of the argument. And I think, looking at this is opening up more discussion about how we honor our men and women from past wars and for heroic deeds and for selfless sacrifice. And we can't do enough. I mean, so it's great. These two waves of new Medal of Honor recipients that came out of Obama's and Clinton's legislation was great, but just kind of put it in comparison, I think the 442nd has 22 Medal of Honor recipients. On average, every regiment in World War II, Army regiment, had one Medal of Honor. So the only regiment that had, more than the average, to a tune of, 22 times was the 442nd. So it's a very subjective process. And more study needs to be done about how we honor our guys. And if we have enough evidence without an officer to put them in for it or her in for it, we need to honor that. Because a lot of times guys, the platoon leaders were dead. So to have an officer put it in was impossible, but a sergeant could have done it, or a gunny was around to be able to do it. But his testimony was not qualified. Now, very quickly, I saw another chat just to be for Chaplin, if I may answer his question very quickly that he asked about Hitler's Jewish soldiers. Can I do that, Michael?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for that question about the Medal of Honor. I discussed that and how subjective this process is, and these modern waves of giving Medal of Honor for past deeds. I discussed that in detail. In fact, I think my book's one of the definitive books about how the Medal of Honor is awarded. Especially from World War II. Now, answering Mr. Chaplin's question about how was it possible that Jews served and people of Jewish descent served in Hitler's military? Well, quite frankly, it was mandated in the legislation and the law. What people fail to realize is that Nazi Germany, when it came into being, had hundreds of years of experience of assimilation. So when Hitler came into power and said Jews are bad, he was faced with how Jewish did you have to be bad? So he came out with the Aryan paragraph, which was chaotic, and said if you had one non-Aryan, quote unquote, grandparent, then you were a non-Aryan. And all these people were coming out of the woodwork that had one non-Aryan parent. So then they got more specific with the Nuremberg laws, racial laws of 1935, saying that a full Jew was a person who had 3 or more Jewish grandparents or who practiced the Jewish religion. And then they created 2 new legal fictions, if you will, two new racial classifications: half Jews, Mischlinge of the first degree, and quarter Jews, Mischlinge of the second degrees. And these, half Jew had 2 Jewish grandparents, quarter Jew had 1 Jewish grandparent, and these guys were in no man's land. And even though they had Jewish background, they were required by military law to serve. They were actually drafted, and people don't realize this. And if they did well, they were Aryanized, and many of the guys who were already in the service, they got special clemency as well from Hitler. So I estimate that 150,000 men of Jewish descent served in the Nazi military during World War II when you look at assimilation records, birth rates, and mixed marriage rates. Now, remember, 17 million men went through the ranks of the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS during World War II. So this number represents less than 1% of the manpower. But in light of the Holocaust, it's quite shocking. And I interviewed 500 of them. And I talk about this in depth in my book, using demographic studies and sociological studies and mixed marriage studies to really show this number to be probably a very low estimate of how many guys were actually in the service. So that's the answer to your question there, Mr. Chaplin. So Michael, thank you. I mean, there's other questions you want me to ask. I got a few more minutes if you want to go forward, but if you don't and want to close it up, I understand.
Yeah, no, we can get to the last few questions, and we just have a few more minutes. Did anyone you spoke with in Japan discuss the Japanese internment camps in the USA?
Yeah, it's really, I find the Japanese in many respects very disgraceful. And I'm sorry to be so brutal with my language. As an academic, you want to be much more circumspect with your words. But the Germans have been incredibly honorable with paying reparations, saying they're sorry, talking about the bad deeds that the Nazis did, their grandparents did during World War II. The Japanese always, when you say, hey, look at all this stuff, they're like, well, hey, you put our guys in concentration camps and you were bad. You were taking away our oil, and that's why we had to attack you. Always apologetic. In the apologia in the Greek sense of the term, always defensive, always attacking back. I'm like, well, two wrongs don't make a right here. And yeah, we did put our Japanese Americans in camps, but we weren't putting them in camps to slaughter them. We did bad things, absolutely. And this was a stain on American history and democracy, no doubt. But we weren't doing it to create mass murder, and we weren't raping the women left and right like you were doing in your camps and holding areas. And then they just get quiet. Their inner coward comes out when you start fighting back with facts. So yeah, they do talk about that, and they seem to kind of know some of the bad things that happen with Japanese Americans with the discrimination and the 442nd and so on. But they love to ignore their own crimes and their bad deeds.
Okay, so I think we're going to end it there. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Rigg. Do you have any final words before we sign off?
Well, thank you so much. If anybody's interested, you can get in touch with me with my webpage. My email is there. If there's any other questions that you have that were not addressed today that you didn't have time to put in, or that come later on after drinking a few glasses of wine tonight, please get in touch with me. And it's an honor to be part of this Jewish War veteran organization. And Michael, thank you for having me. This is the first time I've been able to speak with you guys, so I'm honored.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Thank you so much for doing it. And like I said, we will send a follow-up email to everybody, and we'll links to the book and the recording of the talk. And thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, toda rabah. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.